Welcome back to the With Joe Wehbe Podcast. Today is slightly different. We're just going to do a bit of a recap on the episodes we've done on friendship, which was from episode 65, where we first talked about the utility consumption model of friendship. We went all the way through. And so I think breaking all these down, just wanted to try breaking these down, the episodes into sub-sequences, themes, just to make it a bit easier. And that way it's kind of, obviously everything's still bite-sized, short, 15 minutes or less normally. So there's just a good opportunity to go through at your own pace, but still go through the daily format if you so please. And it just makes it easier to tie up the ideas. Obviously it's always good. We can always talk about so much. And it's the problem here. The dilemma I have is, do I talk about too much? But I think that's why consolidating the important points, stuff we've talked about you might have already forgotten, can be useful. And so, this could be pretty cool format just to distill the lessons. So I guess that's the change. And let's go into friendship, which I think I was thinking about this morning when I wrote down the plan for this episode, is that friendship is a big theme in a lot of films, a lot of classic films and Disney and child based movies, books. But very, very much rarer in, I guess, the world of podcasts and intellectual stuff and writing and all that. So it's just been really interesting to explore. We started with the whole utility consumption model of friendship, which is a bit of a mouthful, a bit overly scientific. It seems to kind of be talking about, or technical rather, to be talking about friendship. But that's, initially comes from Scott, my good friend. And it's the idea that a lot of our quality and type of friendships are based on utility, how useful and valuable someone is, and being useful can be in a given situation, like the person who's really good at the company, the family member who provides and handles the logistics of the family is going to be very loved for taking a lot of stress and pressure off. But it can also be support, right? That's a lot of utility, is support, emotional support for people. But also consumption is the whole social consuming, like you consume an experience. Friendships can often be that consumption as well. So talking about the difference enables you to think about current friends, which bucket they fall into, and you yourself, when and how do you offer each of those, right? And I think what I think about is, this is a really good explanation for why you can have friends and still feel really lonely. And we had a whole episode based on that. We talked a lot about loneliness and where it actually relates to people and where it doesn't. Understanding utility and consumption are a big part of friendships. It just helps you to be more clear about probably the friends you need. I think that was a big theme for these episodes, is figuring out, how do I understand the relationships with my current friends now, especially if I'm a person who's kind of growing or going on my own journey that's not involving them a lot? And what people are now the companions, who's my fellowship of the ring, so to speak, that I need with me on my journey now, without forgetting all the people in the Shire. And for anyone who that didn't make sense to, Lord of the Rings. You haven't lived if you're not familiar with Hobbits and Lord of the Rings. Okay. I also had I talked about how we form friends, and I kind of break it down to, I'm sure there's more, but the buckets I kind of put it in are shared values, shared interests. So in other words, maybe a faith, or or we believe in treating people this way, being very open-minded, having a lot of people around rather than being a secluded group. That's kind of shared values. Shared interests is like, well, we both love the With Joe Wehbe podcast. We both love being a constant student, continually learning. We both love sport, shared interests, and then shared experiences, which obviously these can interlap. We used to go to games together. Well, that's my relationship with my dad is built on, going to footy games together with him and my brothers over the years. They're memories I'll never forget. And family is the ultimate shared experience relationship. You don't need to have any interests. My eldest of my brothers, like so much of the relationship is just built around being 2 years apart. Wildly different interests and ways of engaging in the world, but certainly one of obviously the people I love absolutely most in the world. So shared experience doesn't mean it's a diminished relationship, but it's often, it's just an incidental excuse to have the relationship. And that's one, I think the last episode was you know, we can really be friends and have good relationships with almost anyone. Some people get on our nerves, granted, but that barrier between stranger and friend is certainly very, very thin. And I guess a lot of the barriers we put between ourselves and others are super arbitrary and not needed, and actually counterintuitive to us and them. But it's often there because we have this really dynamics. We're so socially complex, right? We have this really weird way of putting barriers between ourselves and others, and we have this tendency to group. I guess we're wired to be in tribes, but also being in the best tribe is helpful for our desire for sort of status to win kind of evolution game. We're not playing that too hard at the moment though. So we kind of dust that off. But yeah, we talked about a lot of those concepts. Another big thing was loneliness versus aloneness. So this is something I got clarity on recently for me. It's kind of, I'm really loving being alone now more than ever before. If you're listening to this currently, it's still a COVID affected world. So this is a very important adaptation to have. And everyone should be able to be alone and basically go on dates with themselves and spend dedicated time with their self. Doesn't mean you have to be a hermit, but you should have the capacity to be alone and not itch for other people. Loneliness is really this disease out of excessive need for contact with others. I guess another concept we went over was being a C rather than being an O from the Celestine prophecy, like being a whole person rather than being a half person. Being, when you're empty, you're like a leaky bucket and you try and keep filling yourself up from things outside you. But because it's a leaky bucket, it's just this continual process you go through because everything you put in just falls out and you need to maintain it. And loneliness, in this I talked about this Anthony DeMello quote, loneliness is not cured by contact with others, it's cured by contact with reality. And the idea of love, which we should be more conscious and appreciative of in our friendships, not just our romantic relationships or with family. This concept of love is really about seeing people for who they are, not having a warped view of them because we want them to be this jigsaw puzzle piece that fits our own and completes our map. We really want to engage them to multiply the journey. Again, the fellowship of the rings, the people that are going to make the journey even better. But if we get separated, like Frodo does in Lord of the Rings, we still undergo the journey. But the journey's better when you're there. To use Anthony DeMello again, when you come along, the orchestra plays a different set of music. And when you go, someone else comes along, a different song plays. But when no one's there, the orchestra doesn't stop playing. When I'm on my own, when I'm alone, different music plays. And so I guess another thing we reflected on is we talked about people pleasing. I don't need to go into that too much because that was very specific. But I think another thing I want to talk about here is, adjusting the volume. And that just because you grow in different directions from people, there's a tension. Your journeys diverge a bit. There's a tension. Doesn't mean that you neglect or mute those relationships or mute people, that they're not deserving of your time or your love or your energy at all. But you might need to adjust the volume on those relationships because they can impact you. And it might conflict with your journey. And you need to be mindful of that. But yeah, I guess the whole way I think about friendship is, J.R.R. Tolkien, it's funny I talked about Lord of the Rings without forgetting I was going to talk about this, but the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, I didn't even realize this till recently, but he was great friends with C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia books. So they're, obviously, if you're not familiar, two of the most notable fiction works, especially digestible for young people of all time in the fantasy kind of genre. And they were part of this group called the Inklings. They're based in like England university circles, I think Oxford or Cambridge. I think it was Oxford. It's funny that they're friends, and you find this in so many things. People have had amazing journeys, have, friends in that field. You see it a lot with, I guess in Hollywood, it's a very obvious example. But you see it a lot in business as well. You see it like, great partnerships, certainly like Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, two of my favorites. But you see it in a lot of different areas of the business world. So everyone kind of knows everyone. And it can't be by accident. I guess you empathize with people who have similar experiences to you, and you find yourself drawn to them somehow. But it's like, how important are those people to actually make the journey? how important are those people to actually make the journey? And that's what I come to, is that to really bring this home, friendships have been the biggest door openers in my life. And that's why I never shut up about the best way to open 1,000 doors is to concentrate on opening doors for others. Because people I talk about here, so I've talked about, the Andrew Reese story a fair bit. I've talked about, hopefully, Scott a lot, and Nick and Gilly, and those names might not mean anything to you, but they certainly mean the world to me. My family is an obvious one, but I want to talk about friends specifically. Is that in the last 5 years or so, these people were the conduits through which I completely shifted the direction I was going in life. I wasn't hanging on the parapets, but I was nowhere near this amazing non-linear journey I've been on so far. And it was really people who lined the corridors of that journey. People who introduced me to books. Nick Abraham helping me get into From the Ground Up, which changed the way I looked at what I could do with, I guess, my career, if you want to call it that, but I guess I just call it my life. And what I was going to focus on, what I was good at, and then where that compounds and leads to. And so having this clarity around friends and how to be healthy in our relationships with them is this incredible thing, because unlike romantic relationships, unlike family, there's not that much of a limit. You can store friends in places and maybe not have talked for years. But then when you catch a true friend like that, it doesn't require much maintenance, to be honest. When you come back in contact with them, it's kind of like it's just unpause and the movie keeps playing. That's what great friends do. And rather than the one-off, the very narrow, specific relationships we have, which we normally focus more on, which is family dynamics and romantic relationships, your friends are the ultimate thing with a journey, because you can have so many of them stored in so many places. So there's just so many more people that can open a door for you, and then open doors and it's just unlocking this huge positive sum game. It's just people can have a good family and romantic relationship, but they'll always lament even having those, but not having true friends, which is nature's way of signaling to us the importance. So those were the episodes from 65 up until 72, and this one's just been the recap of some of the ideas. And maybe I've done a bit of a hack job there, but it's super important to me. And I look at my life and I audit my life. It's not to say my experience will be the same as everyone else's, but it's just a no-brainer. So understanding the dynamic of these relationships, I just find very useful. And hopefully you do too. And yeah, I guess that's all I want to say about that. So thank you for listening. You can go over those episodes if you haven't listened to them yet, because maybe you've flagged which ones might be for you. And hopefully this just helps you open doors. So just remember, if you want any of the other blog written content, if you prefer that for any reason, you certainly don't have to. I'm certainly happy to be talking to you anyway. But the website is www.withjoewehbe.com/blog. You can sign up for email. You get a once a week email with a key post and idea that you can then discuss. There's other stuff happening, which we'll talk about soon in around to Hat Labs and the whole education mission. But for now, just remember the importance of friendships in your life, to appreciate them, to keep open and placing yourself in the avenues where more rich ones can come by your way. And once again, remember that the best way to open 1,000 doors for you is to concentrate on opening doors for others. This has been the With Joe Wehbe podcast, and we'll see you again tomorrow.